Imagine for a moment that you're the CEO of a startup about to go bankrupt. Your competition has unlimited resources, cutting-edge technology, and an army of employees. You have 3 people in your office, an old computer, and an idea everyone considers impossible. What would you do? Would you give up or look for a strategy so revolutionary it defies all business logic? More than 3,000 years ago, a man named Gideon faced exactly this situation. But the consequences were far more serious than bankruptcy. It was literally a matter of life and death for an entire nation. 135,000 enemy soldiers had invaded his land, and he had to stop them with only 300 men. But here's what's extraordinary. He didn't use conventional military strategies, sophisticated weapons, or traditional war tactics. He used only the principles he found in God's word, and the result was the most improbable victory in military history. Welcome to Be Closer to God channel. Today we'll discover the man who won a war using only the Bible. If this message is already capturing your attention, show your commitment by giving this video a like right now. Subscribe to Be Closer to God if you haven't already, and share in the comments what city and country you're joining us from today. Your participation drives us to continue revealing these extraordinary stories that can transform your perspective on what's possible when you trust God. To fully understand this extraordinary story, we need to transport ourselves to a time when a nation's survival depended on one man's courage. But this man wasn't what you'd expect from a military hero. For 7 consecutive years, the Midianites had turned Israel's life into a nightmare. It wasn't simply military occupation, it was a systematic strategy of economic and psychological destruction. Every year, at the exact moment of harvest, when the Israelites had worked months cultivating their fields, the Midianites came like a plague of locusts. Judges 6:3-4 describes this devastating reality. So it was, whenever Israel had sown, Midianites would come up. Also Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. Then they would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor donkey. Imagine working all year, investing your time, energy and resources in cultivating your sustenance, only to watch ruthless enemies destroy everything in a matter of days. This wasn't conventional warfare. It was economic terrorism designed to break a nation's spirit. The Israelites had become refugees in their own land, living in caves, mountain hideouts, fortified places where they could protect what little they had left. Fear had become their constant companion, hopelessness their daily reality. In the midst of this national crisis, God chose the most improbable candidate to lead the liberation. Gideon, a young man from Israel's smallest tribe, from the poorest family of that tribe, hiding in a winepress threshing wheat. The image is powerful and symbolic. Wine presses were places where grapes were trampled to make wine, located in low, hidden terrain. Gideon was there, not celebrating an abundant harvest, but hidden like a criminal, trying to secretly process the little grain he had managed to save from the invaders. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him, his first words were bewildering. "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." Judges 6:12. Gideon must have looked around confused. Mighty man of valor? He was hiding, terrified, secretly processing grain. Where was the courage the angel mentioned? But here's the first crucial lesson. God doesn't see what you are. He sees what you can become when his power operates through you. The angel wasn't describing Gideon's current condition, he was declaring his divine destiny. Gideon's response reveals the brutal honesty of someone who has lost hope. "Oh my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about?" Judges 6:13. This wasn't rebellion. It was the desperate cry of someone who had heard stories about God's power, but had only experienced defeat and oppression. Gideon was expressing what many feel when facing impossible circumstances. If God is real and powerful, why does he allow us to suffer? God's response was direct and transformative. Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? Judges 6:14. Notice that God didn't answer Gideon's theological questions. He didn't give him a detailed explanation about why he had allowed the oppression. Instead, he gave him a mission that required active faith, not complete understanding. But Gideon wasn't convinced. His next response reveals the depth of his insecurity. "Oh my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Judges 6:15. Gideon was listing all the reasons why he was inadequate for the task. Poor family, low social position, young age, no military experience. From a human perspective, he was right. But God operates with different logic. The divine response was simple but powerful. "Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man." Judges 6:16. God didn't deny Gideon's limitations. He didn't promise additional resources, military training, or political support. He promised something infinitely more valuable: his presence. And when God is with you, human mathematics becomes irrelevant. Before Gideon could face external enemies, he had to deal with internal enemies. God gave him his first mission: destroy the altar of Baal that belonged to his own father and build an altar to the true God in its place. This order was more dangerous than it appears. Baal was the god of fertility and prosperity that the Israelites had adopted, hoping he would bring them better harvests. Destroying his altar wasn't just an act of civil disobedience. It was a declaration of war against the corrupt religious system that had led Israel to its current condition. Gideon obeyed, but he did it at night for fear of his family and the men of the city. Some might criticize his caution, but God honored his imperfect obedience. Sometimes courage doesn't mean absence of fear. It means acting correctly despite fear. When the city discovered what had happened, they wanted to kill Gideon, but his father Joash had a brilliant response. "Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down." Judges 6:31. This response reveals a profound truth. False gods need humans to defend them, but the true God defends himself. When you align with God's truth, he takes care of the consequences. Despite having obeyed and seen God's protection, Gideon still needed more confirmation. He asked for a specific sign, that a wool fleece would be wet with dew while the ground remained dry, and then the opposite. Some criticized Gideon for asking for signs, but God patiently responded to his request. This teaches us that God understands our human weaknesses and is willing to strengthen our faith when we ask him sincerely. But here's what's crucial. Gideon didn't ask for signs to avoid obedience. He asked for them to confirm the direction he had already received. There's a huge difference between seeking confirmation to obey and seeking excuses to disobey. If this account is resonating in your heart, if you're seeing parallels with your own seemingly impossible battles, I want you to know it's not coincidence. Show your faith in what God can do through ordinary people by sharing this video with someone who needs to hear this story. And stay connected, because what comes next will challenge everything you believe about military strategy and divine power. What happened next in Gideon's story defies all military logic and reveals spiritual principles that can transform how you face your own impossible battles. When Gideon finally accepted his calling, he did what any military leader would do. He called up an army. The response was surprising. 32,000 men answered the call, ready to fight against the Midianites. From a human perspective, this was encouraging but insufficient. The Midianites, Amalekites, and people of the East had formed a coalition that the Bible describes as numerous as locusts, with camels as numerous as the sand by the seashore. Judges 7:12. Historians estimate this invading army had approximately 135,000 soldiers. 32,000 against 135,000 were already discouraging odds. But then God did something that defied all military logic. He told Gideon he had too many soldiers. And the Lord said to Gideon, "The people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" Judges 7:2. This statement reveals something fundamental about how God operates. He's not simply interested in victory, he's interested in making it clear who deserves credit for the victory. When human resources are sufficient to explain success, the natural tendency is to take credit. But when victory is humanly impossible, glory automatically goes to God. The first reduction, eliminating fear. God instructed Gideon to make a proclamation. "Whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead." Judges 7:3. The result was devastating for human morale, but revealing for divine purpose. 22,000 men left. Almost 70% of the army abandoned when given the opportunity to withdraw without consequences. This reduction teaches us something crucial about the nature of fear. Fear is contagious. One terrified soldier can demoralize an entire unit. God prefers a small, brave army to a large, fearful one. But the lesson goes deeper. In our own battles, we often try to recruit people who aren't really committed to the cause. God teaches us it's better to have few genuine allies than many lukewarm followers. The second reduction, the water test. With 10,000 soldiers remaining, any military commander would have thought they had already made enough sacrifices. But God had other plans. "The people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there." Judges 7:4. The test was specific and apparently arbitrary. Observe how they drank water. Those who knelt down to drink directly from the stream were separated from those who brought water to their mouth with their hand, staying alert. Only 300 men passed this test. The army had been reduced from 32,000 to 300, a 99% reduction. What was God evaluating with this test? Vigilance, discipline, the ability to stay alert even in moments of personal need. The 300 who remained were men who, even when thirsty, didn't lose sight of their surroundings. They were soldiers who understood that in enemy territory, a moment of carelessness could be fatal. But beyond military qualities, this reduction had a deeper spiritual purpose. With 300 men against 135,000, victory would be so obviously supernatural that no one could attribute it to human strength. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "By the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place." Judges 7:7. That night, God gave Gideon a reconnaissance mission that would change everything. He told him to go down to the enemy camp with his servant Purah to hear what they were saying. What they heard was extraordinary. A Midianite soldier was telling a dream to his companion. "I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed." Judges 7:13. His companion's interpretation was even more revealing. "This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp." Judges 7:14. This moment was transformative for Gideon. He discovered that the enemy was already psychologically defeated. The Midianites had heard about him and were terrified. The fear that had dominated Israel for 7 years had now changed sides. But most importantly, Gideon understood that the battle was already won in the spiritual realm. His job wasn't to create victory, it was to manifest the victory God had already decreed. The strategy God revealed to Gideon defies every military manual ever written. He divided his 300 men into 3 groups of 100. Each man received 3 elements, apparently useless for war: a trumpet, a clay pitcher, and a torch inside the pitcher. There were no swords, spears, bows, or arrows. No flanking strategy, battle formations, or siege tactics. The battle would consist of making noise, breaking pitchers, and shouting. At midnight, the 300 men completely surrounded the enemy camp. In a perfectly coordinated moment, they all blew their trumpets, broke their pitchers, raised their torches, and shouted, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." Judges 7:20. The effect was devastating. The Midianites woke up in total panic, confused by the deafening noise and lights surrounding them completely. In the darkness and confusion, they couldn't distinguish between friends and enemies. They began attacking each other, turning their own camp into a fratricidal battlefield. When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp, and the army fled. Judges 7:22. 135,000 soldiers were defeated by 300 men who never shot an arrow or wielded a sword. The victory was so complete that only 15,000 enemies managed to escape, and these were pursued and captured by other Israelite tribes who joined the chase. Gideon's story isn't just a fascinating historical account. It's a manual of spiritual principles that can transform how you face your own impossible battles. First lesson: God uses the weak to confound the strong. As Paul would write centuries later, "But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty." For 1 Corinthians 1:27, Gideon didn't win despite his weakness, he won through his weakness. When you recognize your limitations and depend completely on God, you become a perfect candidate for his supernatural power. Second lesson: obedience is more important than understanding. Gideon didn't understand why he had to reduce his army or why he had to use trumpets instead of swords. But he obeyed divine instructions even when they defied human logic. In your own battles, there will be moments when God asks you to do things that don't make sense from a human perspective. The key isn't to understand completely, it's to obey completely. Third lesson: victory belongs to the Lord. The battle cry wasn't for Gideon, but the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Even in the moment of triumph, Gideon maintained the correct perspective about who deserved credit. When God gives you victories in your life, it's crucial to remember the source of your success. Humility in victory is as important as faith in battle. Gideon's story teaches us that no battle is too big for God, nor person too small for his purposes. When the people wanted to make Gideon king after the victory, his response revealed the wisdom he had learned. "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Judges 8:23. Gideon understood that he had simply been an instrument in God's hands. The true lesson of his life isn't that the weak can become strong, but that when the weak connect with the Almighty God, they become invincible. Today, you face your own seemingly impossible battles. Maybe they're financial problems that seem insurmountable, broken relationships that seem irreparable, dreams that seem unattainable, or enemies that seem too powerful. Gideon's story reminds you that the size of your problem doesn't determine the outcome of your battle. What determines the outcome is the size of the God you trust and your willingness to obey his instructions, even when they defy human logic. You don't need to be perfect to be used by God. You don't need to have all the resources to accomplish his purposes. You don't need to completely understand his plan to participate in his victory. You just need to be willing to say, as Gideon finally said, "Your will be done, not mine. Use my weakness to show your strength. Let the glory be yours, not mine." If this story has touched your heart, if you've seen parallels with your own battles, share this video with someone who needs to remember that God specializes in impossible victories. Subscribe to Be Closer to God for more stories that can transform your perspective on what's possible when you trust God. And now, as a declaration of faith and surrender to God's purposes, write in the comments, "God, give me Gideon's faith." Let this prayer be your commitment to trust God for the battles you face, no matter how impossible they seem. Remember, the Bible isn't just a book of ancient stories. It's a manual of divine strategies for modern victories. And the same faith that led Gideon to victory is available to you today. Until next time, on Be Closer to God.